The year was AD 377, and the Eastern Roman Empire faced a growing crisis. Previously in AD 376, the Visigoths, led by Fritigern and Alavivus, sought asylum within the Roman Empire as they fled from the advancing Huns. Emperor Valens permitted them to cross the Danube, but their treatment at the hands of corrupt Roman officials, particularly the governor Lupicinus, led to widespread hardship and unrest. In an attempt to suppress the escalating tensions, Lupicinus resorted to force, but his actions only exacerbated the situation, triggering a full-scale Gothic rebellion. The first significant engagement occurred at Marcianople, where the Roman authorities failed to contain the uprising. This allowed the Visigoths to consolidate their forces, soon receiving reinforcements from other Gothic migrants and allied tribes. As their numbers increased, the conflict rapidly engulfed the Balkans, posing a severe threat to Roman control in the region. In AD 377, the Romans launched a major offensive at the Battle of Ad Salices in an effort to quell the rebellion. The Eastern Roman commanders Traianus and Profiturus, later reinforced by the Western Roman general Ricimer, led a sizable force against the Gothic coalition. The battle was fiercely contested, yet neither side emerged victorious. The Romans sustained heavy casualties and failed to decisively weaken the Visigoths, who continued their campaign of destruction across Thrace. With the Roman military struggling to contain the rebellion, yet another confrontation was imminent. The Battle of Dibaltum was about to unfold. After the Battle of Ad Salices, the Goths remained in the area while the Romans withdrew to Marcianople in the south. The Romans, having learned from the previous encounter, refrained from trying to engage the Goths in further battle. Instead, they strategically positioned their troops to block all the passes leading south from the Balkan mountains. According to Ammianus, the Goths did not attempt to break through these defenses. This allowed Roman forces to build strong barriers, trapping the remaining large groups of barbarians in the mountain passes. The Romans hoped that, confined between the Danube and the wilderness, and unable to find a way out, the enemy would perish from starvation, as all necessary supplies had been moved to the fortified towns, which the barbarians, due to their lack of knowledge of siege warfare, did not attempt to attack. Sealing off all routes south through or around the Balkan mountains would have been a difficult task. The terrain between Marcianople and the eastern edge of the Balkans, stretching roughly 100 kilometers from the Black Sea coast, was rugged but not impassable, with multiple routes that could be used for movement. Given these geographical challenges, the Roman forces would have been stretched thin, attempting to block every possible passage. Since the area north of the Balkans up to the Danube appears to have been largely abandoned, it is likely that the Limitanae from the provinces of Scythia, Moesia, and Dacia Ripensis were withdrawn southward. This would have provided additional manpower to reinforce key towns and mountain passes. In theory, the combined paper strength of the Limitanae from these three military districts was around 30,000 men. However, by this point, sustained casualties and desertions would have significantly reduced their numbers, possibly leaving only around 10,000 to supplement the already overstretched comitatenses. Valens appointed Saturninus as Magister Equitum and assigned him to take command from Traianus and Profiturus. Meanwhile, Ricimer returned to Gaul to recruit new troops, while Frigeridas moved south to Beroa, where he established a fortified position overseeing the key passes leading from Illyricum in the west and the Central Balkans in the north. Despite the challenges of containing such a large force, the Romans successfully kept the Goths trapped. According to Ammianus, Saturninus organized a system of outposts and patrols, ensuring that the Romans maintained control over the region. Although the Goths made several attempts to break through, they were repeatedly repelled by Roman troops, who took advantage of the difficult terrain to mount a strong defense. By late autumn, the Goths found themselves in an increasingly desperate situation, as the fields and villages in the region had long been stripped of food supplies. To survive, they were forced to disperse into small, scattered groups, since foraging in large numbers would have been unsustainable. However, this fragmentation also weakened their ability to break through the Roman defenses, as many were trapped in separate mountain passes and unable to amass sufficient numbers to overpower the Roman outposts. Faced with dwindling resources, a faction of the Goths, likely the same group that had fought at Ad Salices, sought external reinforcements. They established an alliance with a contingent of Huns and Alans, persuading them to cross the Danube and join their struggle against the Romans. Upon learning that the Goths had been reinforced by the Huns and Alans, Saturninus gathered all available troops stationed at the mountain passes and ordered a strategic withdrawal. He likely feared that the starving and desperate warriors trapped behind the Roman barriers would soon be forced to launch a concerted assault, overwhelming the defenders by sheer numbers. While this decision ensured the safety of the Roman forces, it also left the mountain passes unguarded, allowing the combined Gothic, Hunnic, and Alan force to move freely into the lowlands. This formidable host emerged from the mountains and launched a devastating campaign across Thrace, ravaging the region from the Danube to the Rhodope Mountains, and even reaching as far as the Hellespont. Entire communities were overrun, with both the wealthy and the poor taken captive and driven into slavery. Roman forces concentrated on fortifying the main towns, but, having learned from previous encounters, avoided direct confrontation with the enemy. As a result, the Goths were largely unopposed in the countryside, where they plundered at will. Those unable to find refuge within fortified settlements were either killed or taken captive. However, it appears that small detachments of elite Roman troops remained active in the field, likely operating from key urban centers. These units engaged in skirmishes against Gothic raiding parties whenever opportunities arose. Ammianus recounts one such incident, illustrating how these mobile forces attempted to disrupt enemy movements despite the broader Roman strategy of avoiding open battle. As the Goths moved south, they passed near the town of Dibaltum, modern Burgas, on the Black Sea coast. Approaching the area, they became aware of a Roman force establishing a camp outside the city, likely in preparation for winter garrison duty. The Roman detachment was led by Barzimeres, the Tribunum Scutariorum, who commanded the Cornuti, one of the most prestigious units of the Auxilia Palatina, along with several other infantry units. It is also possible that Equidius, the Cura Palatii, and a relative of Emperor Valens, was present at the engagement, though Ammianus does not explicitly confirm his involvement. The night was illuminated by the pale glow of the moon, casting long shadows across the battlefield as the Gothic war bands crept toward the Roman encampment. Their advance was silent, their weapons glinting faintly in the cold light. Inside the Roman camp, sentries paced along the perimeter, weary from the day's march. Barzimeres and his officers were making final preparations for the night, unaware that death lurked just beyond the torchlit palisades. Then, without warning, the stillness shattered. A chorus of war cries erupted as the Goths stormed forward, their torches setting ablaze the wooden defenses. Chaos spread through the camp as the first wave of attackers clashed with the outer sentries, cutting them down before the alarm could fully sound. But the Romans did not break. Barzimeres sprang into action.
Noble defenders, listen to my words. We stand on the ramparts, ready to sell our lives dearly. If death is the price for victory, so be it. I hope that you live to celebrate victory with me.
The trumpets blared, their piercing call rallying the soldiers. He quickly assessed the situation. There was no escape, no time to form elaborate defensive lines. The only way to survive was to fight. He ordered his men to form up, reinforcing the flanks, then led the charge himself, his sword raised high. The Cornuti surged forward in disciplined ranks, their shields locked together, their spears thrusting into the mass of Gothic warriors. The initial shock of the Roman counterattack staggered the invaders. The Goths had expected a rout, but instead they found themselves facing a hardened unit of Palatina troops, veterans of countless battles. The Cornuti fought with the relentless efficiency of soldiers trained for close-quarters combat, their blades and spears flashing in the moonlight. The Gothic army understood that victory over the Roman force would grant them access to desperately needed food and supplies, essential for their survival. The Roman soldiers, in turn, knew that if they could hold out long enough, the Goths would be forced to withdraw, either due to exhaustion, hunger, or the fear of impending Roman reinforcements. Both sides fought with the desperation of those who knew their very existence was at stake. The eyes of the Gothic warriors gleamed with hunger, not just for food, but for vengeance. The Romans, standing behind their fortified lines, gripped their weapons tightly. They had seen the devastation the Goths had wrought across Thrace, and they knew surrender was not an option. The Goths surged forward once again, their ranks a chaotic mass of roaring warriors, axes and swords gleaming in the starlight. The Roman trumpets blared in response. With well-practiced precision, the Cornuti locked shields, their spears forming a bristling barrier of steel. The first Gothic wave crashed against the Roman line with immense force. Shields rattled, and the air filled with the sound of clashing metal and cries of the wounded. The Romans stood firm, absorbing the impact before counterattacking with disciplined thrusts. Time and again, the Goths withdrew, regrouped, and charged again, their sheer numbers pressing the Romans to their limits. Barzimeres, at the center of the Roman formation, bellowed orders above the din of battle. His soldiers fought with unwavering discipline, their training keeping them in formation even as the bodies of the fallen piled around them. Blood soaked the ground, turning the earth beneath them into a slippery morass of death. The Schola Scutariorum and Comites, among the finest cavalry units in the Roman army, had taken positions on the flanks. Clad in armor that gleamed faintly in the moonlight, their shields bore the insignia of the imperial guard. These were no ordinary horsemen. They were the personal cavalry of Barzimeres, trained for precision strikes and disciplined maneuvers. As the Gothic warriors attempted to envelop the Roman formation, the Roman cavalry struck. At the sound of a sudden trumpet call, they spurred their horses forward. Swords raised as they met the enemy in a furious charge. The Gothic riders, expecting an easy encirclement, instead found themselves battered by the sheer force of the Roman counterattack. The elite cavalry drove deep into the Gothic flanks, disrupting their cohesion and buying precious time for the Cornuti to hold firm. Despite their smaller numbers, the Roman cavalry fought relentlessly, wheeling their horses in tight formations, striking and withdrawing with precision. For hours, the battle raged in the darkness. The Goths attacked in relentless waves, each one more desperate than the last. Illuminated only by the flickering light of the moon and stars, the Romans stood their ground. The shield wall remained unbroken, a bristling barrier of spears and swords that repelled every assault. The Romans seemed to be holding their discipline, giving them the endurance to outlast the starving enemy. Yet, fate had other plans. The suffering of the Goths at the hands of the empire could not be atoned for by a single Roman defeat or a small number of casualties. To cleanse the perceived injustice, a greater sacrifice was required. The Romans fighting at Dibaltum would become the third offering, following those lost at Marcianople and Ad Salices, in what would prove to be a bloody reckoning. As the night battle raged on, a new threat emerged through the haze of the battlefield. A large cavalry force appeared on the horizon, almost certainly the Huns and Alans, drawn into the conflict by their Gothic allies. The Romans, breathless and exhausted from their grueling battle, barely had time to react. The enemy horsemen wasted no time. With an earth-shaking roar, they charged, their formation stretching across the battlefield like a storm rolling over the land. The ground trembled beneath the thunder of hooves as they hurtled toward the Roman flanks. The Roman troops, drained from hours of brutal combat, struggled to reform their lines. Their ranks were in disarray, their discipline fraying under sheer fatigue. Like a lightning bolt striking dry earth, the Gothic cavalry crashed into the Romans with devastating force. The impact was catastrophic. The Roman flanks crumpled under the sheer weight of the charge, and panic rippled through the ranks. Soldiers were thrown from their feet, trampled beneath the hooves of the charging cavalry. The once unyielding shield wall buckled, and for the first time in the battle, true fear took hold. The Cornuti, the elite and battle-hardened Auxilia Palatina, stood at the center of the fray. They had seen the tide of battle shift before, had withstood the fury of countless enemies, but they knew this was different. Their experience told them the battle was lost. A long sigh escaped their lips, visible in the cold night air. This was the end. Yet, despite the hopelessness, they did not break. The Cornuti did not flee or surrender. With grim resolve, they tightened their grip on their weapons and ready to sell their lives dearly. If this was to be their final stand, they would ensure the enemy paid in blood. The Gothic cavalry pressed deeper, hacking and cutting through the collapsing Roman formations. The battlefield became a whirlwind of chaos, shouting men, dying screams, and the relentless clash of steel. As the Roman lines crumbled under the relentless assault, a single voice rang out across the battlefield, cutting through the chaos like a blade. It was the voice of Barzimeres, the Roman commander, his tone firm and unwavering despite the hopelessness of the situation.
Soldiers, it has been an honor to serve with you.
For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. The weary Romans and bloodthirsty Goths alike turned toward the sound. Then, without any hesitation, Barzimeres, refusing to abandon his men, threw himself into the fray, not on horseback, but on foot, his sword raised high as he charged straight at the Gothic lines. His sword gleamed under the starlight as he charged straight into the Gothic ranks, intent on taking as many foes as possible with him into the afterlife. The battlefield fell silent in shock. Even the battle-hardened Gothic warriors hesitated, momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of his charge. But their moment of hesitation was short-lived. Within seconds, they surged toward him like a wave crashing against the shore. The Cornuti, the elite warriors of the Auxilia Palatina, watched their commander's lone charge. They exchanged brief glances, and then a faint, knowing smile crossed their faces. They understood. This was the moment. There would be no retreat, no surrender. With a deafening war cry, they raised their weapons and charged. The Gothic warriors who had moments ago relished their impending victory now felt an unfamiliar sensation: fear. The sight of the smiling Cornuti charging straight at them with unwavering resolve sent a chill down their spines. These Romans were not running, they were not breaking, they were coming to fight to the last man. The Gothic warriors, momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of their Roman foes, quickly regained their composure and braced for impact. What followed was not a battle of tactics, but a brutal contest of raw strength and sheer willpower. The Romans had abandoned all formations, all strategy. Only a single goal remained: to drag as many Goths into death with them as possible. The Cornuti hacked and stabbed with relentless fury, their weapons cutting through armor and flesh alike. The Gothic warriors, seasoned from countless battles, met them head-on, their shields locked together in a wall of defiance. The melee was savage and chaotic. Roman swords clashed against Gothic spears, and men grappled in the darkness, striking with fists, knives, and whatever weapons they could grasp. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse, bodies piling up as both sides fought with reckless abandon. The ground, slick with blood and littered with broken weapons, bore witness to the final stand of Rome's warriors. Despite their skill and courage, the Romans were hopelessly outnumbered. One by one, they fell, but not before exacting a heavy toll. Barzimeres, bleeding from multiple wounds, continued to fight with the last of his strength. Surrounded, he fought on, his sword flashing in the dim moonlight. But even he could not hold out forever. A spear found its mark, piercing his side, yet he refused to fall. A second blow came, then a third, until at last the mighty commander crumpled to the ground, his body resting among those of his fallen comrades. With their leader dead, the last remnants of the Cornuti continued fighting, refusing to yield until the very last man was struck down. One by one, they fell, surrounded, overwhelmed, and ultimately consumed by the tide of battle. Their sacrifice had been complete. As the dawn broke over the battlefield, silence fell. The Goths, though victorious, had paid dearly for their triumph. The bodies of their fallen warriors lay scattered among the Romans, a grim testament to the price of this victory. Among the few Roman survivors was Equidius, the marshal of the court, who had been captured in the chaos. The Gothic warriors, weary and bloodied, looked upon the fallen Romans with a mix of respect and relief. The battle had been won, but the cost had been far greater than they had expected. Even in defeat, the Romans had shown that their spirit could not be easily crushed. The Goths, now reinforced by their Hunnic and Alan allies, sacked Dibaltum, leaving devastation in their wake. With their ranks bolstered and their confidence high, they advanced toward Beroa, aiming to confront the Western Roman general Frigeridas. However, Frigeridas' scouts detected the approaching enemy in time, allowing him to make a strategic withdrawal to Illyria, avoiding a direct confrontation. Meanwhile, Emperor Valens, determined to end the Gothic threat once and for all, gathered a massive Roman army. With a force large enough to confront the invaders, he marched toward the Goths, seeking to deliver a decisive blow. In the summer of AD 378, both armies finally met near the city of Adrianople. This battle would prove to be one of the most significant and catastrophic clashes in Roman military history.